My name is Maitland Hyslop. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Oilfield Services Group. This is a company based in Dubai. We've got 8 major global locations and 8 smaller global locations, and we provide oilfield inspection services to operators and contractors around the world, and increasingly technology solutions. In this particular case, we're going to talk about radio frequency identification.
Tell us in a nutshell, what is RFID tagging, and how do you have operating and contracting companies use it offshore?
Okay, well, for the operators and contractors, I think there are 2 ways in which they use RFID tagging. One is from a compliance and risk perspective, and also a financial utilization perspective, and the second is from a much more operational perspective. Dealing with the first of those, I'm sure you'll be aware that the downturn in the oil price has made people much more cost conscious. People are looking for much higher utilization rates of their equipment, their spare parts, and personnel. The use of RFID tagging helps that, because you can actually track equipment, spare parts, through the supply chain and know where it is at all times. It reduces stock, it improves throughput, and it makes your supply chain more efficient. We'll come back to some of the compliance and risk things, I think, a little later on. On the operational side, one of the key ways in which RFID can help is through dropped object prevention. Dropped object prevention is a key issue on oil rigs, particularly because it saves lives, it improves inspection time, and it improves safety. It also makes sure that every asset on the rig can be seen. So if I can give you an example, this is the sort of tag that we would use to tag smaller assets on an oil rig. This is an RFID tag. You could put this around a light, for example, and make sure that it's inspected regularly for primary and secondary fittings. You can make sure that this goes around certain other types of objects, whether it's piping, whether it's loose equipment, electrical fittings, and you can take a reader up to this tag, and you can make sure that somebody goes and inspects the item physically, so that you know that that object has been checked correctly, and therefore you have a better chance of preventing dropped objects. That reduces downtime on the rig, because dropped objects are a big cause of downtime on rigs. It means that the rig becomes more efficient and it saves money. But the primary purpose is to make sure the thing is inspected properly. The second way in which you can operationally help manage the rig is by putting RFID tags on downhole pipe. And the management of downhole pipe is an increasingly important issue, partly because of the shrinkage issues that sometimes accompany the storage of pipes. Secondly, the issue we talked about in terms of utilization. And thirdly, the fact that you can actually start to manage and understand how often the pipe has been used, what sort of condition it is in. So that putting this sort of RFID tag on a downhole pipe makes the whole process of pipe management easier, more efficient, and cost effective. So those are 2 operational ways in which we can use RFID tags.
RFID tagging helps U.S.-based and foreign publicly owned companies operating in the U.S. to prove their balance sheets in order to comply with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, also known as SOX.
Yep.
Is RFID tagging primarily concerned with the company's executives and accountants, or does everyone in an offshore company, from the rig floor on up, play a role?
I think from the comments I've made previously, you'll understand that everybody in the company can play a role, and RFID tags can help everybody in a company, operationally, financially, from a compliance point of view, do their job. More specifically, in regard to Sarbanes-Oxley, the issue is for the Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer to prove that the assets they hold are actually there. So a good example in this case is a land rig. A land rig has 80 to 90 key capital items on its superstructure, which the CEO and the CFO would probably have to sign off on as being there. Now that can be done by the use of these sorts of tags, or these sort of tags, but in this particular case we'll probably take a different approach and use a reader and a tag that can see the rig from a distance. So the reader can go up to the rig, it can see these 90 items and prove in an instant that they're all there. And when you've got hundreds of rigs, that means the asset management and the stock take of those rigs can be undertaken very quickly, very efficiently, and the CEO and the CFO have a means of proving that the rigs are there and everything that on the rigs will be there. And that helps not only to prove that from the Sarbanes-Oxley point of view, but in general financial terms of compliance, not only with Sarbanes-Oxley but with Veazey regulations and the new offshore regulations that have just come in over the last week or so. It helps the corporate executive team manage their business better. We've also described earlier in this conversation how risk can be mitigated in terms of utilisation, and from a risk management perspective, understanding where everything is in the supply chain means that the corporate team is better informed about where everything is and how everything is performing. It doesn't just apply to equipment though, it also applies to personnel, because personnel can carry something like this or a little bit smaller in their PPE so that you know exactly where an individual is at any particular moment, and of course that improves safety, it improves fire drills, it makes sure that you understand in difficult situations where everybody is. So for example, if you have a smoke-filled environment, you know how many people are there, you're able to identify who those people are, and in certain types of tags, if you've got accelerometers inside them as well, you can tell if they're manned down or they're still standing. The final point I should make about RFID is that the International Maritime Bureau has identified cybersecurity as being one of the key issues facing oil rigs in the future. And if you manage to tag everything, as we've just described with RFID, and the pipes with these sorts of tags, and you extend that process to include the sensors, and you put a satellite connection on top of the rig, then you can manage the whole IT infrastructure of the rig in a much more effective manner. And that leads to additional protection against cybersecurity threats from outside.
Finally, what are some trends you're seeing in terms of how RFID tagging is being applied offshore?
Well, I think the challenge is acceptance, because it's like everything in life. If you introduce a change, then you have to sort of bring people along to accept the change. So I think the major challenge for RFID in the offshore market is to make sure everybody accepts it and understands that it can save lives, improve inspection times and efficiency, and improve safety. In terms of the future, I think this is very much the future. In terms of making sure that equipment is managed properly, then these sorts of RFID chips will become increasingly common. They'll replace things like stenciling and barcodes, they'll improve the supply chain. In terms of managing people, making them more efficient, and these sorts of things become commonplace. We will link this technology to the sensors on the rig. We will, as previously described, link it to a computer and to a satellite connection, and be able to monitor rigs remotely from a control room and give some advance notice of things going wrong to a rig in much the same way as aircraft engines are now managed from the ground while they're in the air. So we should be able to see the rig in that sort of perspective, and this technology will help us get there.